Frank Sesno here at the George Washington University. I'm speaking with President Steven Knapp, who, among 180 college presidents and universities across the country, signed this "We Are Still In" letter, open letter to the international community's parties to the Paris Agreement from U.S., state, local, and business leaders saying you're still in the Paris Accord, even though the United States of America is not. Why did you sign this, and what does this mean?
Well, first of all, I have to say that a lot of these organizations have been involved in the work of sustainability for many years. We became involved when I signed the pledge that a number of university presidents signed. It was called the College University Presidents Climate Commitment, and I signed that back on Earth Day of 2008. And at that time, we committed to a goal that by 2040 we'd be carbon neutral, and we're making steady progress toward that goal. We also started to develop more and more academic programs because so many of our students are passionate about this issue. So this is not something that came to us with the Paris Accord, although we actually were involved in discussions in the White House. In fact, just before that happened, some of our students had the privilege of actually going to the meetings in Paris and participating in those discussions. So we feel that this is something we've been in for a very long time, and the point we're trying to make here, in conjunction with our partners in business and in local governments, is that this is something that we're committed to over the long haul. Whatever happens on to any particular agreement or whatever particular decision might be made by the federal government, this is a movement that has to continue.
Well, let me quote from the letter. It says that these 180 college and university presidents, 183 I think it is, along with 1,000 governors, mayors, business leaders, and others who signed this letter, pledge to, quote, remain actively engaged with the international community as part of the global effort to hold warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and to accelerate the transition to a clean energy economy. How does this university, what is this university going to do to remain loyal to that?
Well, so first of all, as I said, we're remaining on track with our goals that we've established years ago now,
which are
9 years ago. To reach carbon neutrality by 2040. That's one of the main goals there. But we're also interested in doing what we can to contain runoff into the Chesapeake Bay that comes through the stormwater when it's not controlled. So we've actually done things on our campus to retain stormwater, everything from that to reducing energy use. We have a solar array on one of our buildings that heats several of our buildings. We built 12 LEED certified buildings. All the buildings we built during my presidency for the past 10 years have been LEED certified, and that's 12 of those. And but at the same time, and I think one of the most important things we're doing is developing the leadership capacities of our students who want to be in this for the long haul, because it's their future that's really going to be affected by climate change as it unfolds. And the last thing I'll say is we've been a model for partnering locally with government and other institutions in order to meet this challenge.
So I think it's important for people to understand what universities and colleges are doing, and this is, I guess, what you're saying is how we continue to see the influence brought to bear. You're doing the research around energy efficiency, yes, and other kinds of things. You're doing the teaching of that next generation. And then the operational elements on your campus itself, how you actually power your buildings and where you buy your power, all of these things combine.
Yeah, our slogan is we practice what we teach. That's the idea. So we've always had that dual focus on our academic programs, which are the research and teaching programs. At the same time, we didn't want to be in a situation where we're teaching our students principles of sustainability, where we're doing research on how to make the transition from fossil fuels to these alternative energy sources, solar, wind, and so on, without at the same time making an effort to contain our own carbon emissions in a way that would make us an example and a model. We talk about being a model of urban sustainability. We live in the middle of a heat island. I mean, like every major city, Washington, D.C. is 10 degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside.
Right.
And the reason for that is, of course, all the stone and brick and macadam that retains the heat. So we have a special responsibility in an urban environment to become a model for sustainability. And I think that's what we mean by practicing what we teach.
What influence do you think college presidents, university presidents can have on the larger national debate? Or do they? Should they?
Well, it's been a bit of a challenge because while hundreds of universities signed onto that pledge that I mentioned that I signed back in 2008, and students are passionate about this really across the country, I actually think students partly decide what university they're going to go to based on the question of whether they think that's a university that cares about their future and therefore has an interest in containing the worst effects of climate change, which we see looming ahead of us. And so, I do think that, we as presidents have a role in setting the agenda, but it's not enough ever for a president to establish a vision or to articulate a goal, it really has to get down into the organization. And I was just in a meeting in February, the Second Nature Summit that takes place in different parts of the country. This was in Tempe, Arizona. I serve on something called the Climate Leadership Steering Committee, which is a group of university presidents that are part of that pledge that we signed, who advise Second Nature on ways in which it can become more effective in sort of driving this agenda down into universities. And we all acknowledge that our biggest challenge is because, presidents turn over.
Right.
I'm approaching the end of my 10 years of service as president. That kind of turnover takes place. New priorities come in. So what you really have to do is work hard to make sure that if you see something as an important strategic imperative, that it is, pervasive through the institution. We had some help early on in this effort because we had a board of trustees committee focused on sustainability. The fact that we had trustees support, we had the dean's engagement, many faculty, in fact, a growing number of faculty care about this. All of our students are passionate about this. And so I think that's helped to establish it. But this is not going to really be a successful effort unless we can move outside of universities, which is why I think the most important thing for us to do now is partnering with governments and other institutions, corporations, to spread the effort beyond the walls of academia per se.
Well, that's what this letter does.
Absolutely.
I mean, all the signatures on there. So let me ask you this question, given that background, having signed this letter, how serious do you think efforts to battle climate change have been set back or are going to be set back by the administration's decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords?
Well, so there's no question. I mean, the major negative impact that everyone's worried about is that the U.S. is such an important leader in the international community that if it steps out of a process like this, it kind of gives license to other countries that may want to also step back from the challenging goals that they imposed on themselves. One of the things that's not understood about the Climate Accord is each nation decided what goal it was going to impose on itself, as we did when we signed our pledge, almost 10 years ago.
Right.
And so these are self-imposed goals.
Those weren't mandates that anybody gave you.
No, they were not mandates. They were not. This is not a treaty that was binding on these countries
or on you as a university.
Right.
And you set those numbers yourself.
Absolutely. And so the question is, can you maintain the commitment?
Right.
And so the worry is with the U.S. pulling out, that might give license to other, or an even encouragement to other countries to say, well, maybe we don't need to be sacrificing as much as we were intending to do. And by the way, we don't think it's so much a sacrifice because in the long run, this will be to the benefit of the economies and the social order in these countries that are, especially the ones that are most likely to be affected by climate change. So I do think, on the other hand, the positive side of this is it's a bit of a wake-up call, because I do think that some complacency about this issue had set in during the previous administration, because the previous administration, actually made actually gave a lot of comment on this subject over a number of years, and I think that encouraged people to think that things were going in the right direction, and it probably made us a little bit sleepier than we needed to be in continuing to mobilize and continue to build those partnerships. I think there was a little bit of a drift that set in, and this has probably produced a bit of a backlash that will be helpful in reminding people of how important this issue is.
Well, that actually leads me to my next question. What Planet Forward is all about, and what the School of Media and Public Affairs is all about here at George Washington University, is how we communicate, how we tell stories around these things. And I'm wondering what you think the storytelling becomes or should become in the wake of this decision to withdraw from the Paris Accord. How do we tell the climate story to reach people who don't understand it or who remain very skeptical of it?
Well, first of all, there are a lot of dramatic things that you can say about the effects of climate change that people aren't thinking about because it might be some years off, and that includes whole countries disappearing because of the rising of sea levels. And you can give very dramatic instances of that. On the positive side, I think it tells stories about the effectiveness of the kind of partnerships that we've exemplified here. So from my point of view, my favorite story, I guess, at the moment would be our Capital Solar Partners, right, where we got together.
Capital
Solar Partnership, where we have now put half of all of our electricity on solar power. And we did that in what I think was a very interesting, innovative way. I give a lot of credit to our sustainability staff for working out this arrangement. What we did was we signed a 20-year fixed price deal with an energy company that enabled them to go to the marketplace and get the capital they needed to build 4 solar farms in North Carolina. And the energy from those farms is coming into the grid here in Washington, D.C. The amount of energy that we're drawing from this source is the equivalent of what you would take to power 9,000 homes. It's equivalent to taking 18,000 cars off the road. It's equivalent to abating 85,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide. And we did this in partnership, and the partnership was the key part of it. It's George Washington University, American University, one of our fellow consortium members here in Washington, D.C., and our University Hospital, which is a separate corporation from the university. Those three corporations got together, and as I say, it's resulted in us putting half of all of our electricity on solar power. That's now become a national model. So MIT is following that model right now in Boston, and it's identified some local partners. That kind of partnering, and you could do that when you can engage local city governments and county governments and state governments. You can really build on those partnerships. That's going to make a huge difference if we see this. And what I like are those proofs of concept,
right,
where you have a really positive example you can point to, and there are real numbers you can attach to.
And it's the kind of thing that's driving this economies of scale that's happening in the solar industry that's now got us to almost every 90 seconds in this country there's a solar array that's going up someplace.
Yeah,
so this
yeah.
is exploding technology.
Several years ago, when we put up the solar array I mentioned, which was not for electricity but for heating and our buildings, the day we put it up, it was the largest such array on east of the Mississippi. I think 2 months later, it was the second largest array east of the Mississippi. So exactly what you say is right. These things are happening all over the country.
We talk a lot about the storytelling of innovation, right? We want to tell the story, those things that are new, that are exciting, that are happening. What are a couple of amazing innovations you'd love to see happen in the next 10 years at this university?
Well, I think that it's almost hard to predict that because we would not have, before we came up with this Capital Solar Partners project, it wasn't as if when we signed the pledge back in 2008, we had any idea we'd be going in that direction because we didn't even know that opportunity existed. So that's the result of very innovative work done by a lot of people. And again, presidents don't come up with those kinds of innovations. They come out of the faculty, they come out of the staff. We've had a very engaged staff here looking at ways in which we can make our buildings more efficient. That idea that I mentioned where we took what's called a pocket park, was one of these green quads that we had, and it now captures all the stormwater that falls on the surrounding buildings, and that's what they're sustained underneath the ground and then used to water the plants there. And that water does not end up running off into the Potomac and therefore into the Chesapeake watershed. That was an idea that our staff came up with. It didn't come out of the faculty, it certainly didn't come from me. It came from a lot of people who are working on those innovations. So I couldn't even predict for you what the innovations are going to be. I know there will be some, because I have students who come to my office hours. Every time I have office hours, at least one student comes in with a business plan for a new sustainability project.
Right.
You probably had that same experience.
Oh, yeah, it's great.
And so, so the craziest thing for me to do would be to sit here and tell you what the innovations are going to be. I know there will be innovations because when you put together the energies of our students with the intellectual leadership of our faculty, with the passion of our staff, we know we're going to come up with more innovations that are going to continue to improve the way in which we relate to the environment around us.
In the 10 years that you've been president at the George Washington University, we've seen a lot of change. You mentioned the solar array and so many of these other things. Included in that is establishing sustainability as a minor here. I'm interested in how you think this whole notion, the culture of sustainability, has changed on this campus over this period of time.
Part of it's getting people to see how everything's connected. So we do a lot of work in areas of food policy, food justice, food access. That's related to strengthening local agriculture as a way of reducing the energy that goes into getting food to the table. Who would have thought 20 years ago about putting together the topic of food with the topic of sustainability? They weren't really discussed in the same context. Now we have students who have this broad array of interests, and one of the things that's really, I think, inspiring about this generation, and I think is a real sign of hope for the future, is our students don't care about making a distinction between for-profit and not-for-profit activities. They don't think that, they can't be tainted by getting involved with corporations and that kind of thing, because they see opportunities for, as in the case of our Capital Solar project, they see ways of actually helping getting the market itself, the free market, to serve the interests of sustainability. And they're able to move back and forth across those various domains. So they can think about food one day, they can think about solar energy the next day, they can think about the polar ice caps. They do work in geography that actually directly engages those topics. And they move across the whole range of interests that are now being combined. I think that kind of holistic approach to the problem is something that you would not have seen years ago. You had people interested in environmental studies, but they wouldn't have been the same people that were working in engineering on the kinds of innovations that we see today.
If you're trying to put GW in a leadership role in sustainability, and the point that you made earlier that withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord removes or at least diminishes American leadership in the area of climate, what do you say to students now as to what their own personal, professional to-do list should be if sustainability and climate change is a concern?
Well, there are multiple things that they can do, and I think what you're finding now is there are new investment vehicles. There's impact investing, in which there are actually companies that are out there figuring out how to help municipalities, control their water runoff. As we've actually done some of that work directly here as a university, advising the District of Columbia government and what it should do with its stormwater runoff. So we've taken what we did on our campus and we've expanded it well beyond that. We've become, I think, a trusted advisor to government in some of these areas. Students can get involved in and then that can have a market component to it, because you can actually build businesses around that kind of consulting, and that's a serious career opportunity. And our students are actually creating companies that do that kind of work. We have students that are forming their own consulting companies in the field of sustainability. So if there aren't as many jobs in government, if the EPA is downsized or something like that, there are lots of other things they find to do. And again, that mobility that this generation of students so strongly exemplifies is, I think, a very hopeful sign. If you talk to students today, and you've probably heard this, a bit of a cliche, but it's the truth. If students today don't ask each other, who are you working for? They ask each other, what are you working on? Mm-hmm. And I think that mobility of this kind of, just-in-time sort of economy that we're in, what they've grown up with, as a whole different way of looking at the world from the way I grew up looking at the world, where there were these very clearly defined boxes that you would enter. That, I think, means that they're going to find their way to express their interests and express their passions in their professional lives, and they're going to do it crossing multiple boundaries that we wouldn't have even imagined crossing.
And I think they enter a world, too, that thinking about the culture of sustainability has changed. This idea of sustainability has permeated a lot of corporate cultures. It's permeated communities at a local and state level. So there's so much going on. These partnerships that you're talking about are so dynamic out there right now, and that's what's really exciting. And so, the people who think that it's all about government, they're wrong.
Right.
Well, these innovations are coming at the campus level, at the community level, at the corporate level.
Yeah. Although I would say, don't forget the local governments, because one of the things I've really been pushing is that we have on the coasts. There are a lot of very progressive city governments and state governments that have taken an interest in this, but there's a huge country out there where there are universities and colleges present all across this country, which, with the help of those of us who have been at the forefront of this, I think can play a stronger role in partnering with their local municipalities to actually make a difference at that level as well. And that, by the way, will help to prove, I think, to people across America who become skeptical of science, that their lives can actually be improved by what colleges and universities in their neighborhoods are able to develop.
The impact that they're having right close to them.
Yeah.
Well, President Knapp, I want to thank you for your leadership of the university over this 10 years and for your support of Planet Forward and these stories that we tell
thanks,
around
Frank,
this.
because I do think that storytelling is key, because, the hardest thing about this issue is so complex and it's such a long-range concern, and there are so many pressing issues that take people's time every day. We've got to do this by stories, and I think Planet Forward is an extraordinary example of how you do that.
Well, so we have gathered together to get you a gift as you're heading out. We bought this beautiful book for you. It's called Overview. It is pictures of the Earth from so many perspectives, and is written here. The overview effect, first described by science writer Frank White in 1987, is a sensation that astronauts experience when given the opportunity to look down and see the Earth as a whole. This feeling produces awe for the planet and a profound perception of the interconnection of all life, a reinforced desire to take care of our one and only home. So I want to thank you for helping us
That's great.
take care of our home
I appreciate
and
that.
for moving the planet forward.
Pretty beautiful cover as well. So thanks a lot, Frank.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.